Welcome back to the deep dive. I am really glad you're here with us today because, well, today we are trying to solve a bit of a
A
mystery.
pretty big one, yeah.
Yeah. And it's not a mystery about a crime scene or a missing person or anything like that. It's a mystery about reality,
Right.
specifically why it feels like there are two of them right now.
Two completely different realities.
Exactly. You've got this one reality where the people in charge, the politicians, the policymakers, the folks running the big institutions where they live.
Mhm.
And then you have this completely different reality where, well, where everyone else has to live.
The lived reality on the ground.
Right. And the source material we've got in front of us today, it's a transcript from a discussion by some very sharp Dutch commentators. It argues that these two worlds aren't just drifting apart anymore, they have snapped.
The connection is completely broken. It's a disconnect. And that is really the core theme we are looking at today for you.
Yeah.
We're analyzing this discussion that centers on the Dutch political landscape, specifically involving commentators who are associated with the Telegraph.
And for those listening who maybe don't follow Dutch media all that closely, could you give us the quick profile on De Telegraaf? Because I feel like context is everything for this particular source.
Oh, absolutely. So De Telegraph is the largest daily newspaper in the Netherlands.
Okay.
It's generally considered center-right. It's populist, but, in the older, more traditional sense of the word.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning it speaks to the common man. It's not the paper of the academic elite in Amsterdam. It's the paper of the commuter, the small business owner, the farmer.
The guy sitting at the bar.
Exactly. So when their commentators speak, they are usually channeling a very specific type of frustration that's bubbling up from the ground level.
They aren't trying to impress university professors.
Right. They're trying to articulate what everyday people are actually thinking and feeling.
Okay, so they are the voice of that lived reality we were just talking about. And the picture they paint in this transcript we're looking at is, it's pretty stark. They are describing a bestuurders class.
The administrative class.
Right, an administrative class that has essentially turned its back on society.
Yeah, standing with their backs to society.
Yeah.
That is the exact phrase that jumped out at me from the text.
It's such a vivid image.
It really is, because it implies it's not just that they aren't listening, it's that they are facing the wrong way entirely.
Like they're looking at their spreadsheets and their climate goals and EU commitments.
And right behind them, the actual country is on fire.
Yeah. And we are going to see that dynamic play out in some incredibly specific and honestly, sometimes bizarre examples today.
Very bizarre.
Like we've got a new Minister of Agriculture who the source says is being compared to a villain from a 1980s sitcom.
Oh, I saw the picture they referenced in the source.
Ooh.
The resemblance is, well, it's uncanny.
It really is. And then we have this city council meeting in Amsterdam, which is, supposed to be the beacon of tolerance that devolves into this wild argument about people with a penis.
Yeah, that part.
Just as a way to avoid talking about actual crime statistics.
I genuinely had to read that section 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But it is right there in the transcript.
And it gets darker, too. We're going to look at the reemergence of the grooming gang scandal in the UK, which the source uses as this terrifying example of what happens when class contempt meets political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll touch on the geopolitical implications, too. Stuff like Iran, the Epstein files.
I know it sounds like a lot of completely different topics,
Well-
but they're all connected by this one single thread, right? This idea of the elite versus the street.
Exactly. That is the big so what for today. I want to be clear to you listening. This isn't just us gossiping about Dutch politicians.
No, not at all.
This is a sociological autopsy. We are looking at how technocracy rule by experts and bureaucrats and ideology are supposedly fueling this massive populist backlash.
Right. If you want to understand why parties like the AFD in Germany or the FVD in the Netherlands are surging in the polls right now, you have to understand this exact disconnect we're about to walk through.
Okay, let's dive in then. And I want to start exactly where the source material starts, with the Dutch government.
Because if there's anywhere where this technocrat versus citizen battle is happening in real time, it is right there in The Hague.
Right, and to really understand the anger here, you have to understand the context of what's been going on. The Netherlands has been in this state of political gridlock for a long time. You've had the nitrogen crisis, which we've touched on in other deep dives before.
We have, but let's refresh the memory, because it's crucial for understanding the source's argument. The Dutch government, following European Union regulations, determined that nitrogen emissions near nature reserves had to be drastically cut.
Right.
The problem is, The Netherlands is a massive, massive agricultural exporter. So cutting nitrogen effectively meant shutting down farms.
Which led to massive protests.
Huge.
I mean, tractors on highways, hay bales on fire, the Dutch flag being flown upside down everywhere. The whole country was shaking. It felt like a genuine grassroots uprising.
Exactly. And out of all that anger came a brand new political force, the BBB, the Farmer Citizen Movement.
And they swept the provincial elections, right?
They swept them. It was a massive signal from the voters saying, we want to change, we want a fresh wind, we are completely done with these technocrats destroying our livelihoods.
So the voters screamed for change, and according to the commentators in our source, what did they actually get?
They got Jamie Van Essen.
Okay. Let's unpack Jamie Van Essen. Who is this?
Well, in the context of our source material, this name refers to the newly appointed Minister of Agriculture.
Okay.
Now, the source uses this name and mentions he is likely a stand-in for the actual figure, or maybe a composite of this specific type of politician. But let's stick to how the text describes him.
Right.
The source describes him as an unknown alderman from somewhere in the east.
An unknown alderman. So not exactly a political heavyweight, not a revolutionary leader coming in to shake things up.
No, not at all. And the critique from the commentators is immediate, and it's blistering.
Yeah.
They look at this appointment, and they don't see a fresh wind. They see a clone.
A clone of who?
Of Rob Jetton.
Oh.
Rob Jetton was a previous minister. Very young, very polished, extremely climate-focused. He's often seen as the absolute archetype of the modern disconnected technocrat.
Okay.
So the source calls this new guy a technocrat clone.
It's that feeling of meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Actually, it's worse. It's Meet the New Boss, who was printed in the exact same 3D printer as the old boss.
Wow.
It's this idea that the system, this administrative class, is just fundamentally incapable of producing anything else.
Like a factory.
Yes. You vote for a farmer's party, you vote for radical change, but the machine just spits out another young man in a crisp blue suit who speaks the language of bureaucracy, not the language of the farm.
And speaking of the suit, we have to talk about the visual here. The source brings up a tweet that compared this new minister to a very specific pop culture character.
Yes. Hair flick.
From Allo Allo, the British sitcom, the Gestapo officer with the limp and the leather coat and those little round glasses.
The very same. A Twitter user apparently put their photos side by side.
That is just savage.
It is funny, but the expert in our source material makes a really interesting point about it. They argue it's actually incredibly damaging.
Why?
Because Herr Flick is a caricature of a rigid, humorless, bureaucratic authoritarian. By making that comparison, the public is instantly stripping this new minister of his authority. They are laughing at him before he has even started his first day on the job.
But the source says this appointment is more than just a joke on Twitter. They call it a heavy middle finger.
A middle finger to the voter. That's the key insight here. The argument the source is making is that the voters said, we hate the nitrogen policy, we hate the technocratic approach. And the cabinet responded by appointing someone who looks and acts exactly like the people the voters just rejected.
So it's a signal.
Exactly. It says, we do not care what you voted for. The agenda is the agenda. We're going to execute the policy, and you are just going to have to deal with it.
That is incredibly arrogant if that's the true motivation. It's basically saying democracy is just a suggestion.
And that is the very definition of the bestuurders class in this critique. They view themselves as the guardians of the correct path.
Right, because they have the data.
Exactly. In their view, voters are emotional, voters are uninformed. The bestuurders have the spreadsheets. They know what's best. So they insulate themselves from public opinion entirely.
Is that why the source refers to the cabinet as an accident in slow motion?
Yes, because they see a cabinet that is built on a foundation of absolute contempt for the electorate.
Yeah.
And when you build a government on contempt, you inevitably get incompetence.
Because you aren't hiring the best leaders.
Right. You're hiring the best managers, people who can play the internal political game.
Which brings up the next example they give of this managerial mindset, Sophie Hermans. Now, she's a pretty big name in Dutch politics, right? Daughter of a famous politician.
Correct. She is essentially VVD royalty. The VVD is the liberal conservative party that has ruled the Netherlands for a long time.
Okay.
And the source is brutal about her. They call her demonstrably unsuitable for a heavy ministerial role.
Demonstrably unsuitable. That is not holding back at all. What makes her unsuitable in their eyes?
Well, the implication in the text is that she lacks the gravitas, the vision, or any specific expertise to run a major complex ministry.
Okay.
But, and here is the technocratic twist, She gets the job anyway.
Why?
Because according to the source, she functions very well behind the scenes.
Mm.
She is described as a massager.
A massager. What does that mean in this context?
It means someone who smooths things over in the back rooms, someone who keeps all the fragile coalition partners happy.
Huh?
She isn't put there to lead the country or inspire the people. She is there to grease the gears of the political machine.
So merit, at least in the public sense of being a good leader with a clear vision, doesn't actually matter. What matters is being a good operator within the cheese bell.
The cheese bell. Yes, the Haagskastel. That's the Dutch term for the political bubble in The Hague.
Right.
You're sitting under the glass, breathing your own recycled air, completely cut off from the oxygen outside.
And when you're under that glass for long enough, I guess you start to think the normal rules don't apply to you. Which brings us to this CV scandal they discuss. State Secretary Van Berkel.
Yes, this highlights the arrogance part of the equation perfectly. So, Van Berkel was a state secretary, which is a junior minister level.
Yeah.
And she was forced to resign.
Why did you have to resign?
She lied on her CV. She claimed she had completed a specific study, a degree, which she hadn't actually finished.
Okay, I mean, that's pretty standard political scandal stuff, but the source seems particularly annoyed by the reasoning behind it.
Right, because the commentators point out that she didn't actually need to lie. She had a HEVO diploma.
What's that?
That's a mid-level high school education in the Netherlands. And she had also done a year of propedeutic studies at a university level.
Which is fine. Plenty of highly successful people don't have a master's degree.
Exactly. And the source notes that she was actually quite talented in her role. Media figures like Marianne Zwagerman and Maurice de Haan, who are known for being critical thinkers, they were genuinely impressed by her.
Really?
Yes, she had the skills, she had the street smarts, but she felt this intense, overwhelming pressure to pimp her CV on LinkedIn.
Why do that if you're already respected for your work?
Because in the bestuurders class, the credential is absolutely everything. To be taken seriously inside the bubble, you need the piece of paper. You need to signal that you belong to the educated elite.
Wow.
The source argues she was insecure about being a talented person with a HVO diploma. She felt she needed to pretend to be one of them.
And that insecurity ended up costing her the job.
It destroyed trust. And worse, it reinforced the public narrative that these people are all fake, that they're just playing a role rather than actually doing a job.
That's a tragedy, really.
It is, because the source implies she could have been a breath of fresh air if she had just owned who she was. She had said, hey, I'm not a university academic, I'm a doer. People would have loved that.
But the system doesn't want doers. It wants clones.
Precisely.
So that's the national level. You've got clones, you've got resume padding, you've got a giant middle finger to the farmers. But if you think The Hague is disconnected, the source says, we haven't seen anything until we look at the capital city.
Ah, yes. The Republic of Amsterdam.
Is it really that different? I mean, it's just a city, right? It's still in the Netherlands.
Well, according to our commentators, Amsterdam has evolved into a completely separate entity.
Okay.
It's described as having this morally superior worldview that is almost alien to the rest of the country. If The Hague is a bubble, Amsterdam is a fortress of ideology.
And the source zooms in on one specific neighborhood controversy to prove this point. Stekoost. Walk us through this. What exactly is Stekoost?
Stekoost is a housing project in Amsterdam East. Now, to understand the incredible tension here, you have to remember that the Netherlands is currently in the middle of a massive housing crisis.
Right. There are basically no affordable homes.
None. Young people are living with their parents until they're 30 years old.
Okay, so the stakes regarding housing are extremely high.
Very high. And in this context, the city set up a special project. The idea was to mix two different groups of people in one single complex. Dutch students, young people desperate for homes, and status holders.
Define status holder for us, just so we're clear.
A status holder is an asylum seeker who has gone through the legal process and has been granted a residence permit. They are legally allowed to stay in the country.
Got it.
And in the Netherlands, they often get priority status for social housing because they literally have nowhere else to go.
Which I imagine already creates a lot of tension with the locals who have been stuck on waiting lists for years.
Exactly. The local says, I've been waiting 10 years for an apartment, and this guy just got here and gets a key. But the Stekoost project was supposed to be this beautiful model of integration.
Right.
You put the students and the status holders together, they mix, they mingle, cultural exchange happens. It is the ultimate progressive dream.
On paper, sure, but what was the reality according to the
The
source?
reality, according to the source, was a nightmare for the young women living in that complex.
Hmm.
There were reports of severe harassment, sexual intimidation,
Hmm.
assaults. The source mentions a specific case involving a girl named Lisa and the utter distress of her parents.
So the cultural exchange turned into predation.
In these specific instances, yes. The complaints were overwhelmingly about the behavior of the male status holders toward the female students.
Okay. So you have a genuine safety crisis. You have young women who the city is supposed to be protecting feeling unsafe in their own homes. You would
Oh.
assume the city council would hold an emergency meeting, increase security immediately, maybe separate the groups.
You would assume that. But this is where we enter the Republic of Amsterdam. The source plays a recording of the debate in the city council about this exact issue. And this is where the disconnect becomes almost psychedelic.
This is the penis argument?
It is. So you have a critic Van Berkel from the J21 party, which is a right-wing conservative party, bringing this up.
Okay.
He says, look, we have a problem with this specific group of asylum seekers harassing women. He is looking at the data. He is looking at the actual complaints from the victims.
And how does the ruling coalition respond to that?
A representative from one of the left-wing local parties counters him. And her argument is not, we need more security or we need to look into this. Her argument is anatomy. She argues that people with a penis, referring to the male Dutch students, are just as dangerous as the male asylum seekers.
Wait, what?
She essentially says to him, why are you focusing on the asylum seekers? Students have these limbs too.
These limbs. She reduced a specific pattern of sexual assault to just possessing a body part.
It's a total deflection tactic. The source calls it being the world champion of looking away.
That is a very powerful phrase.
It is, because think about the logic she is using.
Yeah.
She is equating the potential for violence, simply having a penis, with the actual reported violence happening in the complex.
Right.
She is saying men are men, so you cannot single out this specific culture or group.
But that completely ignores the actual victims. If the victims are screaming, it's this specific group that is harassing us, and the politician says, well, the other guys have penises too. She is basically gaslighting the victims to protect a political ideology.
Bingo. That is the absolute core of the source's critique here. The ideology, multiculturalism, inclusivity, anti-racism, is deemed more important than the physical safety of Lisa.
That's terrifying.
If the council admits that there's a cultural problem with the young men from these specific backgrounds, they feel like they are admitting defeat. They feel they are being racist.
So to avoid looking racist, they just become negligent.
Worse than negligent. The source calls the entire debate infantilized. It's like children arguing in a sandbox while the house behind them burns down.
Yeah.
They're debating semantics and gender language, using people with a penis instead of men, while actual young women are afraid to walk down their own hallway at night.
And the source contrasts this high-minded academic gibberish in the council chamber with the actual state of the streets outside, right?
Yes. This brings it back to the lived reality. The source describes Amsterdam as an absolute mess right now.
Yeah.
Garbage piling up, rats running in the streets, basic city services failing.
So the city can't manage to pick up the trash, but they have plenty of time to lecture citizens on gender-neutral language.
That is exactly the grievance. It's this feeling that the elite is obsessed with luxury beliefs and abstract concepts because they don't have to live in the reality of the filth and the danger.
Right. They have their safe, affluent neighborhoods. They have their private transport.
They do not live in Stekoost.
It really does paint a picture of two entirely different worlds. One world is a university seminar on sociology, and the other world is a dark alleyway where you're constantly checking over your shoulder.
And the frightening part, according to the commentators, is that these parties, the ones making these penis arguments, continue to poll very well in Amsterdam.
How is that possible?
Because in the Republic of Amsterdam, the ideology is the identity. To vote against them is to vote against being a good person. It's a completely closed loop.
Wow.
And that loop is what the source argues is driving the rest of the country insane.
And that leads us directly into the next section of their discussion, because the ideology obviously doesn't stop at the city limits. The source broadens the scope here to what they call the culture war. Specifically, they look at the role of Islam in public institutions.
Yes, this is another massive friction point between the elite and the street. The source talks about the hysterical devotion to Ramadan by Dutch institutions.
Hysterical devotion, that's strong language again. What exactly are they referring to?
They are looking at the police, the national ministries, the football clubs, and they see this intense, top-down effort to celebrate and facilitate Ramadan.
Give me an example of what they mean.
The most contentious one they bring up is the police force. The source describes police officers participating in iftar dinners, which is the meal that breaks the daily fast in uniform.
Okay, playing devil's advocate for a second here, isn't that just community policing? Trying to build bridges with the local neighborhood?
That is the official line, yes.
Bro.
But the source argues it crosses a fundamental line. They say it's not just community connection, it's dawah.
Dawah, that's a theological term, isn't it?
Yes, dawah is the Islamic concept of inviting others to Islam. It's proselytizing.
Okay.
The source argues that when a police officer who represents the neutral, secular state bows his head or participates in a religious ritual while in uniform, he isn't just being friendly, he is validating that religious authority.
The quote from the transcript was something like, if you bow with your uniform on, you are participating in Islamization.
Exactly right. And for the secular Dutch citizen, or the Jewish citizen, or the Christian citizen, seeing the state's monopoly on violence, bowing to one specific religion, is deeply unnerving. It feels like a total betrayal of state neutrality.
They also mentioned the football clubs doing this. NEC, Nijmegen, wishing everyone a happy Ramadan.
And the fans went absolutely ballistic over it. Because for the average fan standing in the cold in the stands, football is about football.
Right.
It is their escape from everything else.
Right.
They do not want religion, any religion at all, injected into it by the club management.
But the club feels this intense need to do it anyway. Why?
Signaling. Virtue signaling. The source calls it sucking up. The club executives want to appear inclusive and modern and tolerant to their peers. But in doing so, they completely alienate their core fan base who just want to watch the match.
It's interesting because the source notes that many Muslims probably don't even care about this corporate signaling, right?
That is a really great point. The source suspects that the average Muslim just wants to fast in peace with their family.
Right.
They aren't asking for the local police to host an iftar.
Right.
This is often driven by the institutions themselves or by a very small group of vocal activists. It's that white savior complex, again, the elite, thinking they know what the minorities need, even if the minorities didn't ask for it.
So on one hand, you have the state bending over backward to accommodate one group. But on the other hand, the source suggests the state is actively criminalizing another group.
Yes.
Which brings us to the extremism label.
This starts with a tweet from Ruud Koopmans. And we should note, he's a very respected migration researcher. He is not a fringe figure on the internet.
And what was he reacting to in this tweet?
He was reacting to a report coming out of the British government that was redefining the word extremism.
And how were they redefining it?
Well, according to the source, the new definition was so broad that it included anyone who believes that Western culture is threatened by mass immigration. If you hold that view, you are liable to be labeled a right-wing extremist terrorist.
Hold on a second. Western culture is threatened by mass immigration. That is a political opinion. You can completely agree with it or totally disagree with it, but it's a fairly standard conservative viewpoint.
Exactly. It's debated in parliaments all over Europe.
So if a government labels that terrorism, aren't you labeling, I don't know, nearly half the population as terrorists?
That is Koopman's exact point, and that is the source's deepest fear. They argue that the state is weaponizing language.
Yeah.
If you could just label your political opponents as extremists or terrorists, you don't have to debate their ideas anymore. You can debank them, you can silence them, you can put them on a state watch list.
It's the ultimate way to shut down the lived reality. If a citizen says, hey, I'm really worried about my neighborhood changing, the elite responds by saying, you're a terrorist for even thinking that.
And that silence, that forced state-sanctioned silence, is incredibly dangerous. Because when you forbid people from speaking about reality, really bad things happen in the dark. Which is the perfect, albeit horrifying, transition to the next section of the transcript.
The grooming gangs in the UK.
Yes, this is the heavy part of the discussion, so bear with us. The source brings up the news coming out of London that tens of thousands of old cases are currently being reviewed.
Tens of thousands. You really just have to let that number sink in for a moment.
It's staggering. This refers to the grooming scandals that we used to associate only with northern towns like Rotherham.
Right.
Gangs of men, predominantly of Pakistani heritage, according to both the source and the official government reports, systematically targeting young, white, working-class girls.
And the details they go into. I mean, the source does not shy away from how brutal this was.
No, they don't. They talk about these gangs using drug debts as leverage.
Yeah.
Telling a girl, your brother owes us £1,000, so you have to work it off. Intimidation, serial rape, blackmailing entire families with photos. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was systematic, industrial-scale abuse going on for years.
But the question, a really agonizing question the commentators ask is why? How does something this massive happen in a modern Western democracy for decades without being stopped?
The source offers a deeply sociological answer to that: class contempt.
Explain how class plays into this.
The victims were almost entirely from the very bottom of the social ladder. They were poor, they were white, they were living in neglected council estates. Many came from broken families or the foster system.
Okay.
To the elite down in London, the politicians, the high-level journalists, the senior social workers, these girls were essentially invisible. Or worse, they were viewed as trash.
So their suffering just didn't register on the radar.
It didn't register because of who the perpetrators were and the political implications of arresting them. The British elite was absolutely terrified of being called racist. They were terrified of disrupting community cohesion in these towns.
So they made a bargain.
A silent, horrific bargain.
The bargain being, we will sacrifice these vulnerable girls to protect our multicultural narrative.
That is the direct accusation the source is making, as long as it doesn't touch us. As long as it's not happening to the daughters of the editors at the BBC or the members of Parliament in Westminster, we can just look the other way.
The source also heavily criticizes the role of the media in maintaining this silence. They specifically mention a journalist named Sue Reed.
Yes. Sue Reed was actively investigating this years and years ago. She had the stories, she had the evidence from the victims.
And what happened?
She was shut down. The source describes an almost Orwellian atmosphere in the British press, where trying to tell the truth about these specific gangs was treated as a moral crime.
They even mention a father who tried to get help from the authorities.
That is one of the most chilling anecdotes.
Yeah.
A father realized his daughter was being abused by one of these gangs. He went to the police for help. And instead of the police going out and arresting the gang members, the police came to his door.
Unbelievable.
They came to warn him not to cause trouble or take matters into his own hands.
That is the complete inversion of the justice system. The victim's family is treated as the criminal threat simply because their complaint is politically inconvenient.
And the commentators in our source debate whether something like this could happen in the Netherlands.
And what do they conclude?
They think it's less likely to reach that scale, but not impossible. They argue the class gap is somewhat smaller in the Netherlands, and that the Dutch are generally louder, they complain more readily.
Right.
But they acknowledge that the underlying mechanism, the paralyzing fear of being called racist by the elite, is just as strong there.
It's a really dark warning from history. When you prioritize an ideology over the raw truth, the most vulnerable people in society are the ones who pay the price.
And speaking of the elite's moral compass, or rather the lack thereof, the source takes a very sharp turn here to the international stage. They bring up the Jeffrey Epstein files.
Yeah, this really connects to that growing public idea that the elite isn't just out of touch or incompetent, but maybe something fundamentally darker.
Much darker. The source discusses the recent revelations involving Prince Andrew and the people on the Epstein list, but they focus very specifically on the text messages that were released,
The content of which was
utterly depraved. They reference a specific discussion between perpetrators about a victim, debating whether it would be better to sexually use her or to torture her.
It's absolutely sickening.
The commentators use the word satanic to describe it, and they clarify they don't mean a guy with horns and a pitchfork. They mean the absolute inversion of human morality.
Right.
A mindset where pain becomes pleasure, where human beings are viewed as nothing more than objects to be used and discarded for entertainment.
And this isn't some wild conspiracy theory on a fringe message board. This is documented evidence in a court case.
That's the crucial point they're making. It reinforces the deep suspicion of the common man that the people at the very top, this global elite, are living by a completely different set of rules. Rules that are fundamentally evil.
And then, almost in the exact same breath, the commentators shift the conversation to Iran. Why bring up Iran in a discussion that's mostly about Dutch and British domestic politics?
I think it serves as a stark contrast.
Yeah.
We are sitting here in the West discussing penis arguments and policing pronouns in city councils, while in Iran, we see the raw brutality of a regime that actually does oppress its people in the most literal sense.
The details they share about the Iranian crackdown on protesters are incredibly graphic.
Extremely graphic. They talk about the Revolutionary Guard actively targeting protesters, shooting women in the genitals, shooting men in the chest with birdshot, deliberately blinding people by shooting directly at their faces.
It's medieval violence being executed with modern weapons.
Yes. And the source severely criticizes the Western response to this. They see the West as weak and deeply confused. We have American aircraft carriers circling the region, but we don't seem to know what we actually want.
Right.
Do we want regime change? Are we just posturing for the cameras?
It portrays a West that has completely lost its way. We are so obsessed with our internal luxury problems, like the vocabulary used in council meetings, that we can't muster the clarity to stand up to actual objective evil abroad.
It creates this overwhelming feeling of insecurity for the citizen. If the elite can't even protect girls in Rotherham, and they can't stand up to the mullahs in Iran, then who is actually protecting us?
And this leads us to the inevitable reaction. If the people feel the elite are useless, incompetent, or even malicious, where do they turn for a solution?
They turn to the populist right. The source discusses the massive rise of the AfD in Germany and the FVD in the Netherlands.
And the political establishment's response to this rise is what they call the cordon sanitaire.
Right. This is the strategy of total exclusion. The mainstream parties all agree among themselves, we will never, ever work with these guys.
Okay.
Even if the AfD gets 30% of the vote in a region, the other parties will form a massive, awkward coalition just to keep them out of power.
But the source argues this strategy is actually completely counterproductive.
Completely. Because it just validates the populist narrative. The AfD tells the voters, the system is rigged against you. And then the system literally rigs itself to exclude the party those people voted for.
It proves them right in real time.
Exactly. It makes the voters feel like martyrs. It proves the elite doesn't care about their vote.
They play a clip from a debate in Hamburg that captures this dynamic perfectly, don't they?
Yes. There was a speaker at this event arguing that right-wing politics has a legitimate, respected history. He was listing off figures like Churchill, Adenauer, Thatcher, Reagan.
Right.
He was trying to say, look, we aren't monsters. We are part of the traditional Western political spectrum.
And what happened during his speech?
A young leftist protester stood up in the crowd and just gave him the middle finger.
The middle finger makes a return.
It does. First, it was the technocratic minister giving the middle finger to the rural voter. Now, it's the leftist protester giving the middle finger to history and debate.
It really is a symbol of the death of debate.
That is exactly the source's argument. They argue the left has completely lost the ability to argue their points. They can't explain why they are right anymore.
Right, they don't engage with the substance.
No, they can only signal their moral superiority. They can only show the finger to shut it down. And because they refuse to actually debate the issues, the right just grows stronger and stronger.
The source actually makes a specific prediction about the Netherlands regarding this. They say if this current technocratic cabinet fails, if they don't solve the migrant crisis, if they don't solve the housing crisis, then parties like the FVD could surge again very quickly.
They even mention the potential for a young female leader to emerge and revitalize the movement. The core idea is that the populist energy hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't been defeated. It's just waiting for the right vehicle. The anger is still very much there.
It feels like a pressure cooker. You can clamp down on the lid, you can ban the parties, you can silence the tweets, but the heat is still on and the pressure is still building.
And the source gives us one more really poignant example of how the elite alienates the public, specifically regarding national history. The February strike commemoration.
This is a very specific Dutch historical event, right? Let's give some background.
Yes. The February strike of 1941. It was a massive strike organized initially by the Dutch Communist Party, but it was joined by thousands of regular citizens. It was a direct protest against the persecution of Jews by the occupying Nazis.
Wow.
It is widely considered the one moment in World War II where the Dutch really stood up en masse. It is sacred historical ground for the country.
And what was the controversy that the commentators were so upset about?
The organization running the commemoration invited Jeffrey Afriyie, an activist from Ghana, to be a keynote speaker at the event.
And the source calls this idiotic. Why are they so opposed to it?
Because Jeffrey Afriyie's activism is primarily about colonial history. It's about slavery. It's about his ancestors in Ghana.
Okay.
The commentators argue that his message has absolutely nothing to do with the persecution of Jews in Amsterdam in 1941.
So why would the organizers invite him to speak at this specific event?
Intersectionality. It's the academic idea that all forms of oppression are inextricably linked. The cultural elite wants to make the commemoration more inclusive by bringing in other victim groups to share the stage.
But by doing that, aren't they diluting the specific meaning of the Holocaust and that specific strike?
That is exactly the critique. The source argues that by making the event about everything, about slavery, about colonialism, about racism in general, you are effectively erasing the specific, unique suffering of the Jewish people. You are stealing their historical moment.
It's another example of the elite forcing an ideological framework onto society, even if it deeply hurts the very people they claim to be helping or honoring.
It creates a profound sense of homelessness in time for the average citizen. The feeling is, they took our housing with Stekust, they took our safety in the streets, and now they're taking away our history and rewriting it.
It really is a relentless critique. From the cabinet ministers to the city council, from the police force to the history books, the source sees a system that is actively hostile to the values and memories of the common citizen.
But interestingly, after all of that heaviness, they choose to end their discussion on a lighter note, a moment of pure cultural nostalgia.
Yes, the film Land van Johan.
It's a documentary looking back at the generation of the late 60s and 70s. The source reflects on how free life felt back then, compared to the highly regulated, stifled present they've been describing.
They talk about a specific song, Pittsburgh in the Rain by Leon DeGroff.
Right, a one-hit wonder from 1971. The artist basically faded into obscurity, working in a record shop for years. But the song is being revived and featured in this new film.
There's a really touching intergenerational connection they point out here. You have Leon, who is 80 years old now, the original lyricist, who is 77, and this new singer, Naughty, who is 44, doing a cover of the song for the movie.
It serves as a real palate cleanser for the commentators. After an hour of discussing political decay, violence, grooming gangs, and polarization, they just retreat to music, to a time that, at least in their collective memory, was simpler and vastly freer.
It's a powerful reminder of what people actually feel they are losing. It's not just about specific policies or tax rates, it's about a vibe, a feeling of freedom and common sense that they feel the technocrats have crushed with all their rules and their language policing.
So let's synthesize all of this. What is the ultimate takeaway from this deep dive into the source material?
Well, the source material presents a world where the system, meaning the political, media, and cultural institutions, is fundamentally at odds with the basic instincts and the physical safety of the common citizen.
It warns that if this administrative elite continues to stand with their backs to society, the political landscape is going to fracture even further.
Yeah.
The commentators use the rhetoric of civil war and unrest, not as a threat they are making, but as a dire warning of what historically happens when the disconnect becomes too wide to bridge peacefully.
It leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on. The source predicts a slow-motion accident in politics. But is it an accident?
Right.
Or is this the new permanent state of Western democracies? Two completely parallel realities, the view from the administrative tower and the view from the street that can simply no longer communicate with each other.
It's a chilling question. If we can't even agree on the basic facts of reality, whether it's about a minister's competence, the safety of a local neighborhood, or the definition of our own history, how do we continue to function as a cohesive society?
That is the big question we are going to leave you with today. Which reality do you see when you look out your own window? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.